guys, it's Jerningam here. Me, Jerningam here, guys. I got some Indian water. Just give me a second, my phone's still working. There we go. I got some Indian water. So it's in a bottle like this. Everybody's seen water before, so anyway, it's Indian water. It says in the bottle there. I got this from the local shop where I live. Whoa, did you hear that? Bloody hell. So the bubbles just come to the top of the bottle, guys. When I did that, it's like the air was trapped. It could be sparkling water or crystal clear water. Tastes a bit like lemonade. It's got a very bittery taste. If you guys like bitter and sour things, this would be for you. Well, I've just tasted it and it tastes very, very, very bitter. And not everybody likes bitter and sour things, but the first hit of this drink tastes bitter. It's called Indian tonic water. I don't know why they call it tonic. But anyway, moving on, as they say to me. We're going to be seeing a bit more of Jeremy Corbyn's thing. I think Jeremy Corbyn's in Ireland by the looks of his video. I've got a stress ball here, which is a Destiny game. If you ever play a game called Destiny. That's disgusting taste water. This may look like a ball. I'm trying to get it open. There you go. So it's like a stress ball. So if you guys are stressed, you can sort of do this. I mean, a lot of people get stressed, and especially me and everybody else gets annoyed about things, but there we go. Like I say, I'm trying to say it now. It's like the little orb ball from Destiny. It just flies in the air with the laser eye. It does this. Comes that, if you know what I'm saying. Anyway, we're going to move on to Jeremy Corbyn's video. Okay, this is Jeremy Corbyn's video. It looks like he's in Ireland or somewhere.
We will be back in Parliament on Tuesday to challenge Boris Johnson on what I think is a smash and grab raid against our democracy, where he's trying to suspend Parliament in order to prevent a serious discussion and a serious...
I don't know if you guys follow Labour or Conservative, but I prefer Conservative. But this Jeremy Corbyn guy's Labour here.
Politically stop him.
He's annoying.
With a parliamentary process in order to legislate to prevent a no-deal Brexit, and also to try and prevent him shutting down Parliament during this utterly crucial period. The implications for this country are very, very serious. A no-deal Brexit would mean trade immediately at risk, jobs immediately at risk, Northern Ireland border suddenly reimposed because there would be no deal whatsoever, there would be no backstop of any sort, and he would lead us straight into the arms of Donald Trump and the putative trade arrangement with the United States, which will be very damaging to our economy and, despite what he says, I believe will mean US healthcare corporations lining up to take over our NHS. We believe we can do it, otherwise we wouldn't be trying to do it. I had a very constructive meeting with the leaders of all the opposition parties in my office a couple of days ago to go through these, and we're working together to do everything we can to ensure that Parliament is able to assert itself.
He still thinks he's going to stop Boris Johnson. This makes me laugh.
What about a vote of no confidence? How does that fit into it? Do you need to think about it? It fits in absolutely with it, of course, and that will be put at the appropriate moment. I want there to be a Labour government in this country.
Oh God, not a Labour government, no way.
To deliver for the people of Scotland as for the rest of the UK. We'll be investing £70 billion in Scotland, and we will be...
I prefer a Conservative government, not Labour.
And therefore, it's not my priority that there should be a Indie referendum in Scotland. I think it
God,
would
you have talk shit,
damage
Jeremy
the
Corbyn.
Scottish economy as well, and so we would see it as not a priority for the early part of a Labour government.
He always says the same thing, Jeremy Corbyn, guys. He always talks about the same subject every time. That's what he says. Right, Boris Johnson 10 minutes ago. I'm going to do this. Chair's so squeaky. Or something.
Happens every year.
I don't know what this meeting's all about, but I'm sure we'll find out. Unless I've read the title wrong. I mean, these videos, some of these videos are the short, you know. So, what else are we going to be doing then?
As one of the country's most powerful business leaders, J.Y. Lee's imprisonment in 2017 sent shockwaves through South Korea. The prospect of him returning to prison is equally traumatic. Lee was caught up in the corruption scandal that brought down former President Park Geun-hye and her longtime associate Choi Sun-sil, both now serving long prison terms. Lee was judged to have bribed Choi by providing funds to a foundation run by her, as well as 3 horses for her daughter's equestrian pursuits. But on appeal in 2018, a court ruled that the horses should not be considered as bribes, reducing his sentence so he could walk free from prison.
Again, I feel very sorry to everyone for not showing my best side, and it has been a really precious time for a year, reflecting on myself.
The Supreme Court ruling overturns that decision, sending the case back to the lower court, which could reimpose its original prison sentence.
Among the convictions and acquittal of the charges in the original verdict, the court sends back the case involving bribery.
There's my feet. Look at my feet. Got no socks
All
on.
of this comes at a difficult time for Samsung, caught in the middle of South Korea's deepening trade dispute with its neighbor Japan. Tokyo has imposed restrictions on the export of vital components and raw materials that Samsung needs for its high-tech manufacturing. As it accounts for around 20% of South Korea's exports, that could hurt the country's worsening trade performance. Samsung's lawyers were quick to express their regret for the possible fallout from the case.
I would like to note that the defendants feel very regretful to have caused disappointment and concern to many over this case.
The case will be heard in the next few months. More uncertainty to add to Samsung's troubles. Robert Bride, Al Jazeera, Seoul.
Interesting indeed. Very interesting. One hour ago.
A seismic shift in Italy's political landscape. The established centre-left Democratic Party and Italy's anti-establishment Five Star Movement have agreed to put aside their differences and join forces to form a government. The outgoing Prime Minister, political independent Giuseppe Conte, who resigned last week, returns to the top job.
It will be a government for the good of the citizens, a government which will help modernise the country and make our nation more competitive internationally, but also more just, more supportive and more inclusive.
The surprise partnership puts an end to the first post-war populist government in Western Europe. Italian politics imploded earlier this month when Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini withdrew his League party from its turbulent alliance with the Five Star Movement. The right-wing firebrand had hoped to exploit his party's popularity to trigger snap elections and become Prime Minister. If successful, it could have led to the creation of a fully far-right government, but the plan spectacularly backfired. Salvini is furious, accusing Brussels, Berlin and Paris of plotting against him.
Rapidi, precisi e diretti.
We've been direct and honest with the President, to whom we've expressed bewilderment. The bewilderment not just of our party, but of millions of Italians looking on at this ridiculous political show. A game of power that's been going on for days between the Democratic Party and the Five Star Movement.
Salvini's drawn fierce criticism and wants support for his crackdown on boats trying to bring stranded migrants to Italy, putting relations with other EU members under strain. He described African refugees as an army of benefit thieves and criminals. Once the most influential man in government, Salvini's now the most powerful man in opposition, and the League still remains the country's most popular party. The new coalition is united against a common enemy. It will need to hold firm to keep Salvini at bay. Neve Barker, Al Jazeera.
Well, I hope so. We can all but hope. Just trying to see what else is on the news channel. Nope, that's right.
I think two things are being conflated. One is the routine beginning of a new session set out the domestic agenda, which is what is happening. And the other is the suggestion that
Jacob Rees-Mogg, this guy is.
The leadership election,
Conservative Party UK.
that you would suspend Parliament from July through and beyond the 31st of October. I was saying at the time that that was absurd. No sensible person was in favour of that, in my view. That would have been constitutionally improper. But we have a new session of Parliament normally every 12 months. This session has already run well over 2 years. We are not losing many days parliamentary debate because it coincides with the conference recess. So this is routine. It's actually quite boring. But the arch remainers who don't want us to leave the European Union have started crying constitutional crisis, but actually they're crying wolf. The key here is that the European Council takes place on the 16th, 17th of October. That will be when any decision is made on any agreement. And then there will be 13 days after that to debate and implement an agreement if one is come to. So that's the key period when Parliament needs to be sitting, and Parliament will be sitting. But it also crucially means we can have a new Queen's speech, and we can get back to talking about the NHS, dealing with crime. The debate on the Queen's speech has nominal areas to debate day by day, but actually you can speak on any matter relating to the Queen's speech. So people could spend the whole of those 4 to 5 days debating leaving the European Union, and they could put down an amendment to the Queen's speech or to the humble address, thanking the Queen for her speech, saying things about the European Union. So that is 4 or 5 days which can be debated to Brexit. In terms of the conference recess, at my first and so far only outing at the dispatch box, I referred to the conference recess and said I expected it would go ahead, and the opposition chief whip nodded in agreement, and that's all recorded in Hansard. So it had been agreed that the conference recess would go ahead, as it always does. Yeah. Parliament hasn't sat in late September for 80 years.
Okay then. Right. Moving on to Hong Kong. Still protests in Hong Kong, I think. Well, there was before, but then it's gone peaceful and it does it again, doesn't it?
而家針對緊嘅就係喺警察去拘捕一啲示威者嘅時候，
These times of police arrests protests,
或者無意咁去觸碰到佢哋
they would touch the protest part on as for intro.
又或者係男仔嘅
These protesters, male for the police, were grabbed.
摸佢哋嘅下體咁樣啦。
Police say search and allegations, and nobody fails. Survived protests shared the allegations, and third throws up to support. I think I'd accept police brutally, trouble, and but they have accepted happened and any needs also been assaulted. Sort of a bit difficult when you're trying to read it and then it's just so fast. A responsibility to believe that the matters that personal think like their other genders and stuff. No matter the shirt they wearing or what they come out to say. This is what they're saying in Hong Kong, but they're speaking in a different language, so I'm reading the text. And you make sure you guys can see the text on the TV. You should never. I tried to read most of that, guys. I did try, but it's just the writing's always fast on it. I can't seem to get it all that when you're writing it down. Could Donald Trump close European biggest air base?
Just days ahead of U.S. President Donald Trump's next trip to Europe, senior U.S. officials have renewed threats to pull U.S. troops out of Germany if Berlin fails to boost its defense spending. In June, Trump suggested moving the more than 30,000 soldiers stationed here to Poland. But would it really be that easy for the U.S.
Moving people, moving American...
presence here? Our reporter
I gotta get this right here, guys. They're moving American military from Germany, 30,000 to Poland. That doesn't make any sense.
To Ramstein, the biggest U.S. base in Germany, where most locals want the Americans to stay.
A key American outpost in southwestern Germany. Ramstein Air Base. The biggest U.S. Air Force base abroad. Just what takes place there is kept secret even 70 years after the base was founded.
It is impossible to get any closer to the airbase. The entire compound is a high security zone, and we certainly weren't allowed to enter the base itself with a camera team. Instead, the US military gave us some of their own video footage from inside Ramstein.
The US military shows how munitions and weapons are stored. Supplies for fighters in Syria, Mali, or Afghanistan. Paratroopers practice jumping. Fighter pilots set off from here on their missions to Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. Defending Germany only plays a smaller role, according to this expert on the US.
Of course, it's a bit of protection, but at the same time, the strategic importance of Ramstein for U.S. foreign policy and security policy must not be underestimated.
And it's not just the airbase. The biggest American military hospital outside continental United States is also nearby. Doctors and healthcare workers train here for emergencies and for working in a war zone. Wounded soldiers are brought here from all over the world. Soon they will be relocating, not to Poland, but closer to the airfield. A new hospital costing around $1 billion will be built, more modern and better equipped. Forest at the edge of the airbase has already been cleared. The mayor of Ramstein feels the large investment alone means there will be no move.
You never know what'll get used or not, but I can't see it happening.
The US has also invested a lot in modern warfare in recent years. The Air and Space Operations Center is located at the airbase. It's one of the US military's data hubs.
It is now an open secret that Ramstein plays a central role in US drone strikes. Important information on targets are relayed to the US via Ramstein.
Opponents of the base are unhappy about preparations for war being made in Germany. For them, a US withdrawal would be a reason to celebrate. But most people in Ramstein disagree. Germans and Americans have grown together over the decades, as seen at the German-American Friendship Fest. Among the guests are former and active members of the military who don't believe the airbase will be relocated.
Ramstein is a central point in Europe for the whole American forces. And not only in Europe, but Africa, Middle East, everything is centered around Ramstein. And that's why this place is going to stay here.
We don't need to leave, man. We're having a good time over here.
Look carefully at the airbase. More than 1,000 buildings, many of them underground. I know the place. For that reason, they can't move it all to Poland.
The Trump administration's threats to relocate are something people in Ramstein cannot imagine will ever happen. The joint location is too important for both Americans and Germans.
Let's bring in our political correspondent, Simon Young, here. Simon, we just heard from some analysts and people in Ramstein saying that they don't believe that the U.S. will be pulling its troops out of Germany anytime soon. But what about the political establishment here in Berlin? Do policymakers here take Trump's threat seriously?
Well, certainly Chancellor Merkel has said that she's not unduly concerned about this. She believes that American troops are here to stay. And politicians generally point out that, as we saw in that report, you know, the US is spending hundreds of millions every year to support the infrastructure that these troops need. Germany, by the way, also spends hundreds of millions on things related to the US military. And people say, you know, that these suggestions that the US might pull back have been going on for decades, but places like Ramstein have continued to grow, not least because they're central to the defense, not just of Europe, but of the United States as well.
But does Trump have a point, though, with respect to Germany spending enough on its NATO defense budget? Is Germany really carrying its weight as one of the strongest, economically richest countries in NATO?
Well, in terms of spending, perhaps not, because there's a 2% target that NATO has. Germany is up to 1.36%, so there's still some way to go there. Germany doesn't like to get involved in combat missions. It's jaw, not war, and that's one of the arguments that's often made in this relation, because Germany says, you know, we put the emphasis on supporting civil society and preventing conflict in conflict regions, and Germany spends a lot of money there. Apart from that, in recent years, Germany has got involved in all sorts of overseas military operations. They're peacekeeping in Kosovo, they're training in Afghanistan, they're doing logistics in Mali, and they're also involved in the anti-IS coalition in Iraq and Syria, of course, alongside the United States.
And these foreign missions, we should remind ourselves, have only become possible since the end of the Cold War in the 1990s, politically in Germany. Now, the NATO 2% spending threshold, that's just one point of contention between Germany and the U.S. There are many others, so many that Trump has decided not to visit Germany on his upcoming trip to Europe.
Well, that's true. I'm not sure that that's a big problem. Trump did also say recently that he's very happy to come to Germany and looks to do that at some point. But as you say, there's a lot of tension between the two partners, particularly over the Iran nuclear deal. US has pulled out. Germany says it's still sticking to that plan to get Iran on side. There's also trade tensions, quite important, with Trump saying, you know, that that US companies are treated unfairly in Europe, while Angela Merkel says she wants a trade deal between the US and the EU as soon as possible. So there are these problems. Germany's also not signed up to the protection mission that the US is proposing in the Strait of Hormuz, where Iran has been threatening international ships. And that's another example, really. Germany says we want de-escalation, we want diplomacy, and we're a bit worried that Donald Trump might drag us into some sort of conflict we don't want to be in.
Simon, thank you so much. Our political correspondent, Simon Young.
Well, what could I say about that? She knows.
Very exciting agenda to make our streets safe.
As you guys can see, that's my feet. I should really put some socks on, but I'll do that later. I'm too busy filming a video.
And if we win, Parliament will not be prorogued and MPs will have the time to fully debate and scrutinise and decide whether they limit the damage that no deal will do.
think away, thinking away, I think every day.
It takes a tough breed to hack a living from the searing hot, inhospitable Amazon region. They come to rear cattle and to plant soya, yams, and much else besides. They do so legally, but are vulnerable in this huge, poorly policed region to illegal speculators.
They are grabbing all of that area, part of the Jamari Nature Reserve. They're grabbing everything, and the word is they will cut everything down. If they do, then they'll set it on fire.
This man said he feared for his life if his identity was revealed, saying neither the police nor the authorities have the resources to protect him from neighbours who covet his land. Just when the president is being called upon to do more by the international community and some of those living here to do more to defend the Amazon, he moves in the opposite direction. He invites more development, which many living here feel will put both the environment and themselves at greater risk. President Bolsonaro says too much of this forest is protected, neither nature reserves or indigenous reservations, that poverty awaits those who don't take advantage. But this rancher said he thought there had been enough deforestation.
The Amazon has to have cattle. We don't need to deforest anything else, though. Just take care of the lands that are already deforested. Take care of the rivers, of the springs. Cattle is what we live from.
However, he said he doesn't blame the president for the land grabs or the fires. He believes the region is simply too big to police, despite the efforts of the local authorities.
Crime happens everywhere, however, our policies have been positive so far. But because of the size of this state and the way its land is occupied, our policies will take time to work to guarantee security in both urban and rural areas.
Other small farmers stress that farming can and should only be done in a sustainable way.
Some people don't respect the law, and this creates a bad image of our country abroad. But we keep fighting for local farmers who work with nature, the ecosystem, so that we can all survive.
The battle for land has been raging since the arrival of the first Europeans. The dream that in this vast country there is enough for everyone, often shattered by greed, corruption, and poor management. Daniel Schreiber, Al Jazeera, Rondônia State, northwestern Brazil.
Plenty of news talking.
It's obvious that Boris Johnson is trying to put the thumbscrews on possible rebel MPs. So essentially saying to his possible rebels that, we're very, very close to a no-deal Brexit cliff edge, and if they want to play around, if they want to try and, chum up with the opposition and try and frustrate any possible no-deal Brexit, then there isn't that much time.
Tom, after 18 months of pretty defensive mode from number 10, this is just outright aggression, isn't it?
Well, it's a decisive move, and for the first time it's number 10 showing that they actually are going to be engaged in this tug of war, if you like. It's number 10 saying that we're not just going to sit back and let Remainers ride roughshod over the constitution in the way that they've done with sort of unprecedented bills over the last few months, forcing through legislation over the course of a day, seizing the order paper from the government. This is the sort of unprecedented
In which case,
stuff
why treat people
Remainers...
like fools and say it's nothing to do with Brexit?
Well, I think it's two things. Firstly, of course, there is a bit of it that is to do with Brexit, but it's not all to do with Brexit.
All of your first answer was to do with Brexit, and the critics say, look at this, it is exactly what you think it is, which is an opportunity to shut down all of those manoeuvres we were hearing from the opposition party yesterday.
Well, I think it's both. It's certainly not the sort of prorogation that we were hearing about months ago, the sort of prorogation right over the edge of that 31st of October deadline. There is still time for Parliament to debate, to discuss, to legislate.
Dawn, do you think there's
before
still
and
time?
after.
There is a very, very small amount of time, and I think that pressure is exactly what Boris Johnson wants to put upon his possible MPs. I think that essentially Boris Johnson is trying to force the Conservatives to get behind any possible deal. I think he'll probably end up with very, very little change from Theresa May's deal, and he's essentially trying to get them behind that before.
Do you think it was a
Halloween.
tacit admission after yesterday with the opposition party saying, look, we're going to try to legislate against a no deal, that he acknowledges in part that he would possibly have lost that vote if there was to be a vote?
Yes, absolutely. I think the sudden fact that the Lib Dems and Labour and all the opposition parties have started working together put the fear factor into the Conservatives, and this is a way of completely frustrating that, just to try and get Brexit through before Halloween.
But it shows that the executive isn't impotent. There are things that the executive can do to ensure that that mandate from the people is finally fulfilled.
Do you agree with what Tim Shipman from the Sunday Times said, that he thought in part it could be Boris Johnson deliberately provoking the various opposition and those rebel Conservative MPs to go for that vote of confidence, because he can see the fragmentation that exists in that particular political area?
It's saying put up or shut up. We heard that this coalition of politicians against the people yesterday came together to say actually what they'd rather do is a legislative route. It's saying, no, we're not going to give you so much all the time in the world to pursue this. Either you take us out of power, you install the possibility of Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister, the most unpopular leader of the opposition in the history of this country, becoming Prime Minister, or you back this government and the promise that actually the majority of MPs gave to the people when they voted for Article 50.
John Foster, is there a counter-argument that actually perhaps the opposition was rather fragmented? This actually gives them something to coalesce around?
I think so, absolutely, and I think what we've seen in the last week is the opposition finally getting together and saying that no deal is something that they completely stand against, even though a lot of Labour MPs actually do back Brexit. The opposition essentially are now coalesced together against no deal, and I think Boris Johnson has to decide whether to push for no deal or actually stand back and look at what the EU have said, which is that the only reason they would ever extend the period is for a general election.
The other option, well, you bring us to the general election. I want to talk to Tom about that. Do you think we've got closer to a general election, given the poles apart nature of the dialogue with the EU? We know what the situation is with a potential no confidence vote. Does that all bring us to a point where a lot of analysts have said Boris Johnson actually wants an election, to frame it in terms of, I want to bring you Brexit, and these are the people that are blocking me? Well, is that the bigger strategy of what is going on here?
No one that I've spoken to in Number 10 wants an election before that Brexit deadline. What the Conservative Party, what Boris Johnson wants to do is get Brexit done, and then there is that possibility of having an election perhaps before or just after Christmas. And don't forget, Boris Johnson, in most recent polls, has a 10-point lead above the Labour Party. It's much more attractive to have an election now for the Conservative Party than any other party.
Just a final couple of points. Dawn, to you first of all. There'll be those members sitting in cabinet. Matt Hancock is one, Amber Rudd is another, who said some pretty straightforward things about peregrination in the past. Matt Hancock said it goes against everything that those men who waded onto the beaches, we're talking in the commemorations after the Second World, were fighting for. Amber Rudd said, I think it's outrageous to consider proroguing Parliament. We are not Stuart kings. Can they stay in cabinet?
I think that a few people will have to think very deeply about whether or not they will stay in cabinet. I think there will be some resignations, and I think that Boris Johnson was very, thought that he was being very bold. He has been very bold, but that boldness may come back to bite him. And if he goes into general election, it may bite him even deeper than it did Theresa May.
You bring me to my final question quite brilliantly, because, and it's the question to both of you. I mean, the stakes, they could not be any higher after this move for Boris Johnson. If it succeeds, well, it succeeds for him. If he fails here, if they face him down somehow, he is wounded now, permanently going forward, is he not?
Well, the stakes have always been high. This is a premiership that has staked its legitimacy, its life on delivering that Brexit, and everyone who joined the cabinet was signing up to that project. They knew what they were getting in for. Actually, most MPs should know what they were getting in for. When they voted for Article 50, that puts no deal as the legal default. And unless they vote for a deal, we leave for...
John Foster, a brief final word from you.
I think that we are definitely looking at a general election. I think Boris Johnson may regret this, and I think that he may regret this even more than Theresa May regretted calling an election in 2017.
We don't want another general election. I'm just annoying.
Well, first of all, 17.4 million people voted to leave the European Union. And Dicey, the great constitutional theorist who sets out the basis of parliamentary sovereignty, said that the point of our conventions was that Parliament and the Cabinet could follow the will of the nation. And that is what Parliament and the Cabinet are doing. So this is completely constitutional and proper. There is going to be lots of time to debate before the 31st of October. Parliament will be sitting then and will be able to have whatever motions it wants. I think the outrage is phony. And it is created by people who don't want us to leave the European Union and are trying very hard to overturn the referendum result and don't want the benefits of leaving the European Union, including cheaper food, clothing and footwear, which we will get when we are free to set our own economic policies.
The debate over Brexit in the United Kingdom intensified today as Prime Minister Boris Johnson moved to suspend Parliament. That request was approved by the Queen and will limit the amount of time Parliament convenes before the October 31st deadline for the UK to leave the European Union. Lisa Desjardins will have more on the story in a minute. But first, we have this report by Paul Brand of Independent Television News.
Tonight, the power is shifting from Parliament to Prime Minister. No need to defeat MPs, and he can just dismiss them, suspending their work, allegedly, so he can get on with his own and announce a plan for government.
We're bringing forward a new legislative programme on crime, on hospitals, and making sure that we have the education funding that we need. And there will be ample time on both sides of that crucial October the 17th summit. Ample time in Parliament for MPs to debate the EU, to debate Brexit, and all the other issues. Ample time.
3 members of the government flying up to deliver Her Majesty's directions, refuting the claims of a coup.
So they wouldn't know what they were talking about. It's normal functioning of our constitution.
What the Prime Minister's doing is a sort of smash and grab on our democracy in order to force through a no-deal exit from the European Union.
The Speaker, John Bercow, added shutting down Parliament would be an offence against the democratic process, suggesting he'll help MPs act quickly. The protests, though, don't come from all quarters. Others are happy to vacate their benches, insisting it's nothing unusual.
People will say, you campaigned to bring democracy back to Parliament, and now you're in favour of closing Parliament down.
That is yeah, but you could say that, but it's absolutely wrong. Parliament is not being closed down. The period is exactly how you would do it under any parliamentary period.
Protesters managing to break through the barriers outside Parliament, arguing it's the Prime Minister who's crossing the line.
So what does all this mean for the United Kingdom, Brexit, and the European Union? We turn to Robin Niblett, director of Chatham House, the British think tank. Thank you for joining us from London. First, this would be the longest suspension of Parliament since 1945. It's obviously dramatic, and it could also be risky. Why do you think Prime Minister Johnson is doing this?
Well, he's basically trying to spike the guns of the opposition that want to try to take away the control of the EU negotiation and not give them the time, despite what you said in your lead-in programme of ample time. He's trying to cut down and constrain the amount of time they might have had in Parliament to try to force through legislation that would prevent him from allowing the UK to leave the EU without a deal by October 31st. So he has a very particular plan. Now, you say it's the longest period of suspension. Actually, he's been a bit cleverer than that. He's combined what is a normal sort of 10 days, roughly, of prorogation allowed by the Queen, so the new government he's leading can set out its programme. He's linked that on to what is a traditional 3-week recess for the party conferences at the end of September. So those 5 weeks have been created by linking those 2 chunks of time together and really leaving Parliament only with about 3 days at the beginning of next week to try to block that loss of time.
So when Parliament returns after the prorogation and suspension, all of that is completed, there will just be, by my calculation, a couple of weeks. That's what Mr. Johnson refers to as ample time before Brexit is set to take full effect. Does this mean that a no-deal Brexit or a crash into Brexit is likely or certain at this point?
Well, what he would say, and there is obviously some truth to this, is that the only way he can get a deal or get the EU27 to compromise on the existing withdrawal agreement that they established with Theresa May is for them to believe that the UK would definitely leave by October 31st. So his point of view is, I need the negotiating credibility, not with Parliament holding a separate gun to my head, but the EU27 have to believe it. So I can get some compromise on the famous Irish backstop, then I can only do it if people really do believe we're going to leave. So from his point of view, this is to strengthen his hand in the negotiation. Personally, I have to say I'm sceptical that even if the EU27 did give some type of concession on the Irish backstop, he would still be having committed kind of £30 billion worth of British money to be able to secure a 2-year period of limbo within which the UK would carry on being in the single market, carry on being in the customs union, and trying to negotiate a future deal. So I have to say, I'm a little bit sceptical that even if he were able to get a concession on the backstop, whether he would be able to take it or get it through Parliament.
And that, of course, is referring to the issue between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland over all of this and that border, how that border would work. But let me understand you. Do you believe then a no-deal Brexit is now likely?
I think a no-deal Brexit has got to be at least a 50% chance. I mean, that's, most people would have had it down to 10, 20% even 3 or 4 months ago. So it is a very real chance. Now, we've got to remember, a no-deal Brexit, if you know it's coming, and if the EU27 know it's coming and the British government know it's coming, there will be mitigating steps they can take to make sure it really isn't the kind of cliff edge that's been described. But it would have a significant impact on the British economy. And I think the chances, as I said, are above 50%.
Let me understand what that could mean then also.
Right, go back onto that video, guys.
Is there any concern for increasing unrest or perhaps more cause for separation of other countries within the UK, like Scotland, because of this?
Well, it's very interesting. Ruth Davidson, who's the very charismatic and popular leader of the Conservatives in Scotland, and that's often been a contradiction in terms, but she's done a great job of rebuilding support for the Conservatives in Scotland. There is talk that she may actually hand in her resignation tomorrow. There's been all sorts of stuff on the news tonight. She's been a big opponent of Brexit and took actually Boris Johnson on during the referendum campaign directly. So yes, this is the kind of thing that is going to really mobilise voters in Scotland to say, here we are, an English Prime Minister doing what's best for the English Conservative Party against Scottish interests. There will also, of course, be a question, if there's a hard Brexit, on what happens in Northern Ireland, where a majority also voted to remain during the referendum in 2016. So no, I think you can see with the passion that's been built up outside Downing Street, this has come as a shock. It is partly, I think, a sign of weakness on Boris Johnson's part that he's had to take this step as transparently and really as he has. And we'll see how, the blood is up and the newspaper headlines are going to be pretty severe tomorrow.
We will be watching this very closely. Robin Niblett, thank you for joining us.
Bloody hell. What could one say? Yeah, 2 minutes ago, Boris Johnson's done a video.
The NHS does an amazing job, and they produce about 140 million meals a year. Some of them, of course, most patients have a fantastic experience. The quality of the meals is too variable, and so what we want to do is drive up standards across the board. And so we're having a review by Philip Shelley. He's going to be assisted from a culinary point of view by Prue Leith. Number one, some patients don't actually eat in hospital when they really do need to, because they don't feel the food is appetizing enough, particularly elderly patients. Second thing is, we get too many complaints from patients about the quality of the food, and I think it does affect their experience when they're in hospital. And sometimes it can be something as simple as not having hot toast, having toast actually made on the wall. So one thing we want to deliver is hot buttered toast for the patients of this country.
Does have some point of saying that, Boris Johnson?
Michael Kretschmer is a man in a hurry. He's been leading Saxony for the past 5 years. He's now in a race to persuade voters to give him another 5. His is a deeply conservative state, perhaps more so than anywhere else in Germany. So, on a summer day in Bautzen, his message is clear.
Saxony is a strong state. If we get a reasonable government, we can deal with all the challenges we face, better than almost any other state in Germany. And people will see that we have the courage and the strength to say things as they are. I want the Free State of Saxony to carry on in its Saxon way.
The challenge for Michael Kretschmer is not persuading the party faithful here in Bautzen, it's persuading people around this state to vote for his party and not for the other party of the right trying to win in Saxony. That other is called the Alternative for Germany, a far-right party shunned by the mainstream, but supported by as many as 1 in 4 Saxons, if the polls are accurate. Its message is stark. Drastically cut immigration, stress tradition and homeland, urge voters to reclaim their land and write a new chapter of history.
It's clear. We want to be the strongest force in Saxony, our party in parliament. We want to beat the Christian Democrats, and I tell you, I think we could do it.
This November will mark 30 years since the fall of the Berlin Wall, when people denied a voice by communism cried out for the freedom of speech. And yet now, the AfD is using reminders of the old East Germany to campaign on a slogan of Vollende die Wende, complete the changes. One analyst believes this represents a disillusionment among many East Germans over what the end of the Cold War brought them.
I feel, well, I have to be quite careful. We have a very narrow channel of political correctness, and if you make arguments beyond this channel of political correctness, well, you're out of the game. And this is a feeling. We did not succeed in establishing that kind of democracy that we really wanted to have.
When free elections returned here in 1990, the Christian Democrats won an absolute majority in Parliament on a promise to bring prosperity and openness. Now, fewer than 1 in 3 voters say they'll vote CDU, and its leader faces an emboldened far-right alternative that wants him out. Dominic Kane, Al Jazeera, in Saxony.
We're in very deep thought at the moment. Well guys, I hope you've all enjoyed this video. Please like, comment, subscribe and share these videos with your friends. Now I doubt I'll be doing another stream on this later about this problem or another day. I'll do some more videos of the news. See you in the next broadcast guys. Thank you for joining me. Peace. See you later. Peace.